So I first want to thank everyone for joining us. My name is Jenna Schwinnard, Marketing Executive at PCA Technology Group, and I'll be your host for this webinar. I understand we do just have 45 minutes of your time, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in regarding our topic for this webinar, which is navigating today's threat landscape. And it really involves discussions around 2021 cybersecurity predictions. So I know we are thrilled. We have some amazing thought leaders with us today to simply give visibility into the threat landscape and what steps you can take to better protect you and your business going forward. And so we have with us today Corey Nachreiner, Chief Technology Officer at WatchGuard. He has been on the front line of cybersecurity for nearly 16 years, and I know he has some interesting facts to discuss with us today. We also have Steve Szubinski, President of PCA, who has been an instrumental leader since PCA's establishment in 1989, and overall just has really great insights into client needs as this world we live in continues to evolve with security. If you go ahead to the next slide, Corey, I just have a few housekeeping items. Please mute your line upon joining if you haven't already. Questions can be submitted in the chat at any time, and please note we will have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and it'll be sent via email within 3 business days, along with your $30 Grubhub gift card as a thank you for joining us. And I'm also happy to share that you will have the option to donate to charity instead of the Grubhub if you so wish. And so I'll have more details on that at the end of the webinar, but for now, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Steve Szubinski to talk more about PCA and why we're here today.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I just want to talk a little bit about, first of all, why PCA? Why PCA Technology Group? First of all, we are a trusted advisor. We've been around, as Jenna mentioned, since 1989, and so it just makes us old, right? But we like to leverage that experience to help you identify the right solutions for your business needs while focusing on driving financial savings, reliability, and security. Number 2 is we're customer focused. We carefully listen to our clients and work together to uncover their pain points. We all have them, but while adding our own personal touches to ensure a positive customer experience. And then finally, we like to leverage our core strengths. We work to create effective strategies for our customers by focusing on listening and leveraging our experience and values, all while exceeding or trying to exceed your expectations and making our relationship enjoyable. We like to have fun, right? But one thing I also wanted to talk about real quick before we go to the next slide is there's an important item that we have noticed since this whole pandemic has started, and that there's a need for increased focus on cybersecurity, not only in the office, but also at home. We all know that working at home is here to stay at this point, certainly much more than it was prior to COVID. But in the end, we have to ensure that the home environment does not really leave the door open for the bad guys to be able to walk in and gain access to your work assets, and that's certainly a concern. Next slide, please. So then, why WatchGuard Technologies? WatchGuard for over 25 years, well, really for over 25 years, WatchGuard has pioneered cutting-edge cybersecurity technology. They have enabled more than 80,000 small and mid-sized organizations with over 10 million, it's a lot of endpoints, but 10 million endpoints from around the globe, really to protect your most important assets. In a world where cybersecurity landscape is constantly evolving with new threats really emerging daily, WatchGuard makes enterprise-grade cybersecurity technology available to every organization. And certainly we use it, our own dog food here. We eat our own dog food, whatever you want to term it. But the bottom line is that we leverage WatchGuard a lot in our internal networks and for our clients. In the end, PCA could select any cybersecurity technology company with which to partner. And we chose WatchGuard. Why? Because they provide a diverse range of offerings. They continually keep up on the ever-changing landscape of cybersecurity. And they are there for us and our clients when we need them. And they truly value the relationship with us. And in the end, their solutions just work. They just do. And we've been working with them for many years, and we're excited to continue to do that. So with that, I would like to introduce you to and turn over the presentation to WatchGuard CTO, Corey Nachreiner.
Thank you so much, Steve. And by the way, the partnership we have with PCA is fantastic. I mean, we really couldn't exist without great service providers and IT experts like PCA. We really, because we focus on mid-market customers, that includes a lot of small and mid-sized businesses. You know, we know a lot of those businesses can't dedicate a ton of their time to doing security themselves because they're just so busy running their business. So we think it's fantastic to get service providers to help you with that task. So, you know, the industry couldn't exist as well without great providers like PCA. In any case, as Steve mentioned, my name is Corey Nachreiner. I'm the CTO of WatchGuard. I have many duties at WatchGuard. Some of them is even mergers and acquisitions and acquiring new security technology. But really my passion and how I grew up in WatchGuard was as a security analyst. And I run WatchGuard's Threat Lab team. So a group of security researchers who we essentially keep our thumb on the pulse of both the industry and the underground to keep track of what the bad guys are doing so that we always have products, services, or understandings that help us prevent those bad guys from doing so to our customers. In today's presentation, it's a little different in that I'm going to be sharing our 2021 predictions, which is kind of what I think is a more fun presentation for security nerds or propeller heads like me, because we get to imagine interesting ways hacks change in the future. Now, the one key thing I want to talk about these predictions presentations is we get pretty wide-ranging in general, or wide-ranging in the types of security predictions we make. And sometimes we look for kind of just really interesting, specific or contrarian predictions because it gives you a clue of where technology and security could go. Long story short is no one really has a crystal ball to the future. So sometimes the more specific we get, these core predictions may or may not hit. You know, in the past, we've been anywhere from 50 to 70% accurate. But having said all that, every single one of these specific predictions, regardless of what the prediction is based on real world trends that are actually happening today. So that's all a long way of me saying, pay more attention to the trends that we're talking about. The predictions are the fun part, but the underlying trends that are getting us towards those predictions are real world things happening today and are things you should pay attention to. And by the way, throughout these predictions, the whole point of doing predictions is to kind of give us a chance to preempt these types of attacks by putting up the right defenses. So for most of these predictions, one or two are the type of predictions you can't really do much about, but for most of these predictions, we will have some practical takeaways, practical things you can do now to kind of avoid this thing from happening. So without further ado, since we only have a limited amount of time, let's dive right in with the first prediction that you can see right now, which is automation drives a tidal wave of spearfishing. Now, I think you all kind of probably have heard of spearfishing and know what it is. Classic phishing without the spear is kind of this mass sent email. It's intended to kind of look like a legitimate email for, say, OneDrive or from the FedEx. And the whole goal of a phishing email is to look like a legitimate email that you might click on so that you'll do something unaware that you're playing into the hand of the attacker. A classic example is you might get an email that appears to come from your bank. When you click on links in the email, it takes you to a fake login page for your bank and tries to steal your credentials. But they're not always trying to steal your credentials. Sometimes they're trying to get you to install something or go to a place that will force malware on your computer. That's traditional phishing. Spear phishing, of course, is the more targeted version of that. In traditional phishing, it's a very generic email that's sent to many, many people around the world at once. Spear phishing, on the other hand, is much more dangerous variant because this type of email is kind of catered towards either you or a group of people very much like you. So it could be you directly, or it could be perhaps a department at your organization. The bad guys have done some sort of reconnaissance, they've looked up information about you, or they've looked up information about your company to understand maybe the org chart of the company, so that they can craft a much more convincing email that might look like it's a everyday business email. And this type of reconnaissance spear phishing, you know, more people are apt to click on it because you might receive an email that looks normal to your everyday business. For instance, I have received emails when I've put up a new job role for our Threat Lab team where someone is pretending to say, hey, I think I have a candidate for your role, and they attach a Word document, and they're talking about a real role I posted on my website, but that Word document is actually a booby-trapped document they want me to open to take over my computer. So that is spear phishing. Now, for our sake, one of the good things about spear phishing is it takes more work from the attacker. That reconnaissance, that extra work they have to do to figure out a little bit about us and to craft that more convincing email has in the past been a manual process. So that's why phishing is, or spear phishing is much more hands-on for the bad guy. But this prediction is bad guys are starting to leverage all kinds of automation techniques to improve their spear phishing emails. At a high level, there's tools on the underground now that will help find out more information about you. They could, for instance, if they have a single email address for a user at your corporation, there's tools now that will find related email addresses, related accounts that might be associated with that person. Or there's other applications that will try to find that social media accounts related to that email address, where they can learn more about, your interest and stuff like that, as well as tools that will automatically scrape the website and start to make kind of an org chart or relationship, understand relationships at an organization. Beyond those automated tools, they've long had automated tools for phishing. They long have tools that will automatically send messages. But one thing that we see them doing on the underground is combining their automated reconnaissance with their automated phishing tools. And they've started sending out spear phishing messages, which are a little more customized to individual victims, but you can tell there's an automation tool adding things. For instance, I myself, all through October through November, was getting emails directed towards me, Corey Nachreiner, the CTO at WatchGuard, with WatchGuard as part of the lure, and talking about various HR things, a new employee. One said I was fired and should check a PDF for some severance notification. But in either case, I got multiple emails around this, so you could tell it was automated, and yet it had some details about me and my business. In any case, the bad news for us is spear phishing is one of the most dangerous ways, one of the most common ways bad guys break into networks. They don't have to use fancy zero-day or fancy attacks. If they can trick one of your employees to give away a little information or to do something wrong, they might be able to log into your company as that person without any hacking tools and then gain full access. So spear phishing is very dangerous. And as I said before, one of our predictions from it is the manual process had left it with relatively low volumes. It's not something you see every single day, but if this prediction is true, we can expect higher volumes of spear phishing. So that's the first prediction. What to do about it? Well, you really need to know about spear phishing. There are many technical mechanisms that help. The one thing I don't think anyone can guarantee you yet is that a spear phishing message will never make it into your employee's inbox. The reason they can't automatically just block all of spear phishing is, unfortunately, spear phishing is individualized enough and sometimes business specific enough that it's hard to tell that it's different than a normal business email. But what you can do is spear phishing will almost always have a malicious link or a malicious file attached to it. So the one thing technology and solutions like WatchGuard is very good at doing is preventing your users from reaching those malicious links if they hit them with tools like DNS Watch, which is a DNS firewall, Web Blocker, which blocks known phishing sites, or we can strip the attachment out of email. We even have really advanced malware that even if it's a brand new Word document that's been booby-trapped, especially for you, things like APT Blocker uses behavioral analysis to analyze Word documents and recognize the bad ones from the good ones. So some of the takeaways here is make sure you have strong technology, strong advanced malware protection to strip these bad emails of their attachments, and anything that's going to prevent your users. Occasionally users will make mistakes and click on a link. You want tools that pay attention to the sites they're going to and make sure they don't go to known bad ones. That said, a really strong defense against this, regardless of the technology tools, is training. You definitely need to train your users about spear phishing. And obviously you probably have normal phishing training, but you should put heavy emphasis on this spear phishing, as it's much harder for normal users to figure out if these emails are bad or not, just because they use some pretty good lures and business purposes. So that's prediction number one. Rolling right along.
Corey, I just wanted to mention one quick thing. We had an employee that started with us about 1.5 years ago, and then our second day here, she got an email that looked like it was coming from our CEO. Second day employed here. We just literally enabled her email account just a little, a couple days prior. And second day here, she gets an email that looks like it's coming from our CEO asking for some information. It's crazy.
Yeah. They're very good at leveraging. They're starting to understand our business relationships, and they're good at leveraging that. I mean, to some extent, we all have probably heard about the SolarWinds compromise in the news. While that wasn't necessarily spear phishing, it shows you the ecosystem that is business. We're all kind of related to each other. We all have business partners. And as attackers learn more about our business partners, whether it's our CEO or maybe the CEO of a company we work with, the emails they send can be quite convincing sometimes. So beware of it. Second prediction, and this one I'll go a little bit quicker, is cloud hosting providers will finally crack down on cyber abuse. So let me explain this one, because I don't think it's intuitive just from that name. But one thing my threat team found throughout 2020 and also 2019 before is bad guys, the attackers out there, threat actors, are really starting to abuse public cloud services to host some malware. One example is phishing, which we were just talking about. Normally phishing, besides the email, there's a landing page you go to if it happens to be trying to fake a login, or if it's trying to redirect you to some malicious site. A lot of the time, we see these bad guys abusing subdomains of a legitimate root domain. So if you're not technical, what does that mean? Well, obviously, one of the tricks you use when looking at phishing is, is this really going to, I don't know, AWS or cloudfront.net or Microsoft.com? You look for that legitimate root domain to make sure it's spelled right and it really is Microsoft.com. But one thing we might forget to realize is a lot of the public cloud services out there allow customers to have vanity URLs or subdomains that really are part of legitimate domains. Think of OneDrive documents. When you share a OneDrive document, it actually comes from OneDrive.com. If you are using AWS, you probably have a lot of assets that are a subdomain of cloudfront.net. And there's many other domains like that where the real legitimate owner, the company that provides the cloud service, is giving you a subdomain there. So we see a lot of bad guys basically pretending to be customers of these so that they can then have their phishing pages hosted on a legitimate domain. Why is that bad? Well, some mechanisms, when they're trying to block your users from going to URLs, if they're doing it at a domain level, we can't block the official root domain, because obviously that would block you from using the legitimate services. So you have to have something that can block the subdomain or the entire bad URL. So anyways, we've been seeing this happening a lot. Bad guys leveraging these public cloud services for bad, not just good. And we think it's hit a crescendo. And really at the end of 2020, we saw a lot of services like Google, Microsoft, and others talk about new automation techniques they have for rooting out anyone on their cloud networks that are leveraging it for bad. So it's a pretty simple prediction in that we think these there's not much you can do when these malicious files are hosted in someone else's domain. I will say some of our URL protections, something called our Reputation-Enabled Defense Service and Web Blocker, do block full URLs. They don't just pay attention to the domain. So we can block certain pages on a legitimate domain without preventing the entire legitimate domain. But really, it's kind of up to these public cloud vendors to keep bad stuff on their network. And we are saying that in 2021, you'll see a lot of them start doing this a lot more. So really the practical takeaway here is just the knowledge that as you're looking at phishing and stuff like that, besides making sure it's going to a domain you trust, any links in email, you should also know that some of those domains you trust, if they're public cloud domains, you may not still want to trust them because they may be a subdomain that a bad person has taken over. The next prediction is hackers infect home networks with worms. And this one actually has a business connotation that may not be clear in the title, but the truth is hackers target business networks when infecting home networks with worms. So first, let me say what's not new about this prediction. First, attackers have been infecting home networks for years. You know, ransomware goes after consumers, or at least has in the past as much as it does businesses. There's lots of legitimate reasons they want to take over. Bad guys could take over any computer. If you don't know what a worm is a specialized piece of malware or part of malware that once I can take over one computer, the worm will automatically, without any work from me as the bad guy, scan that internal network and find ways to take over other computers on the network, usually using like network vulnerabilities. You might remember WannaCry ransomware leveraged something called Eternal Blue, which was a Microsoft SMB or file sharing vulnerability to spread throughout a network. So neither of those things in themselves are new. Hackers have always tried to go after home users too for different reasons than they do for businesses. And a lot of malware attaches worms to it so that it not only infects one computer, but once it gets inside your network past the hardened perimeter, it can start to infect other computers too. What's new about this prediction, and it speaks to what Steve was talking about from the change to more and more remote workforce, is we believe in 2021, these home-focused worms will have mechanisms that are seeking out office networks. Specifically, the worms will have modules in them looking for a VPN, a virtual private network. You guys probably have heard of VPNs before. In fact, I bet you a lot of your remote users leverage them today to keep your communications confidential and safe, and to give extra internal access to employees that have to be home. VPNs are fantastic. I don't want to, we sell them and use them too. But bad guys understand that home users are increasingly using VPNs. There are lots of technical ways to detect whether a computer you're on has a VPN going. I won't go into all the boring technical details, but there are commands you can do if you have a Trojan on a computer that will show you network adapters. And you're going to have a virtual network adapter that's named slightly different. There's route commands you can do that will show you what is the private network that virtual network adapter is going to. And long story short, we believe hackers are going to automate modules that are specifically looking for indicators of an infected computer having a VPN. And then their worm will specifically target the private network that VPN goes to. And obviously their hope is that gets them into business networks, not just home networks, but using the home as kind of a Trojan horse because of this remote work. So that is the prediction. What should you do about it? Well, in this case, one thing first, you should definitely use VPNs. I highly recommend you use multi-factor authentication for VPNs. And I also highly recommend that your computer, the VPN you choose, like for instance, we have a product called TDR, Threat Detection and Response, which is a host agent that you can put on hosts as well as the VPN. It will do a health check of the computer and make sure there's certain security things in place before it allows your employees to VPN. So you should do certain things like that. But all of that said, the reason this threat is dangerous is you can do all that and the worm might still be able to hijack your VPN. And the reason is, if I infect a computer where your user has actually legitimately connected to the VPN already, there's not much I can do to prevent other people on that computer from using it. So the real takeaway here is we really need to use more advanced malware detection mechanisms. You don't want this malware and this worm on your computer in the first place. I don't have time to go into depth about what advanced malware detection means, but at a very high level, a lot of traditional malware protection is very heavily signature-based. And the problem with signature-based is it's reactive. Malware has to come out, researchers have to understand it and write a pattern for it before you have a protection. When I say advanced malware protection, I'm talking about malware protection that can be proactive, not reactive. It uses things like behavioral analysis, real time of what files are doing or processes are doing on your computer. It uses machine learning to predict whether something is bad based on lots and literally tens of millions of samples we've seen in the past. So long story short, Advanced malware is the type of malware that even if it's a brand new worm that has never been seen before, it can use this sort of behavioral detection or machine learning prediction to figure out it's bad and not let it run. WatchGuard, by the way, as I'm sure PCA has other options as well, we have many different layers of anti-malware. Some, like Gateway Antivirus, are very signature-based, but then others like APT Blocker or Threat Detection and Response, or also Intelligent AV, which uses machine learning, is really good at catching this brand new evasive malware. So you don't want these worms on your network. Make sure you have advanced malware protection. Moving right along, let's talk about booby-trapped smart chargers leading to more smart car hacks. And this is my peanut butter and chocolate prediction. I'll talk about that in a second. And this, granted, is not really a business prediction. If you're in a business, this may not help you directly, but think about this kind of from an overall trend level. The amount of new devices, we generally call them Internet of Things, that are showing up all over the place, whether it's in our consumer life or in our business life, that don't look like a computer, but actually are kind of these embedded computers that can lead to vulnerabilities in our network. One business example is WatchGuard got this fancy, cool flavored water machine that our employees can use. It has a Wi-Fi connection that connects to your network in order to bring all kinds of services to the panel it uses. So something is seemingly benign as a water cooler, a fancy water cooler, may be a connection into your internal network. So that's why even car predictions are kind of important to business. But let's get to the peanut butter and chocolate of this. This is really us combining, oh, go ahead, sorry, Steve.
Oh no, I was just laughing at your peanut butter and chocolate reference. I enjoyed that.
Well, yeah, let me explain that. What I'm really kind of explaining here is two things we have seen happen before. We have seen smart car hacks before. Around 2015, 2016, you might have heard of a big one that affected Jeeps that both Charlie Miller and Chris Velasek found, where using the onboard entertainment system, which does have a cellular connection, or the, I forget what they're called, OnStar, all those systems on your dashboard actually have cellular connections. So your cars are internet connected now. In any case, using that system, they showed how they can take over part of the CAN network, a network of many different computers that are inside your car, to do things like take over steering, because nowadays we have all these automated systems like automatic camera-based braking or quick steering to kind of move you if the camera detects you're getting too close. They were able to do things like, stop a car immediately or turn a car over the internet. So smart car hacks have existed. You've probably heard about them in the news, but I would say in the past 2 years, there hasn't been any really huge breaking car attacks. That's the peanut butter. The chocolate is, we know all kinds of mobile phone-based attacks, but one of the most interesting lately is mobile phone-based attacks using the charging mechanism. The charging mechanism of phone, besides providing power, has a data connection. Obviously, it's USB. You probably know all about that. And there's a lot of different attack scenarios that are from booby-trapped or malicious chargers. It could be a charger that someone sells you. You plug your USB key in what just looks like a normal wall wart, but there's something in that wall wart that allows it to suck data and do various attacks on your phone. There's even ones that, using the charging mechanism itself, it can damage the phone. It can literally kill USB killers that can literally kill the device, ruin the device that they're plugged into. So in the mobile world, we've been seeing a lot of ways to hijack phones or to damage phones using the charging cable. So we're just mashing that peanut butter and chocolate together in that smart cars are kind of similar. While they don't have the same complete data channel that mobile phones do, a smart car charger isn't just the power. It actually does have its own communication and data channel because there's lots of complexities to properly charging the battery. In fact, there's even home servers you can get when you buy a smart car that helps with charging management. And we've already seen at least one vulnerability where bad guys are starting to play with booby trapping or trojanizing that smart charging server to do anything from not letting your car charge to damaging its battery capability. And you can even imagine, if they put it on a charging server, a scenario where a car may not charge because a ransomware pops up on your charging server and they ask you to pay ransomware if you want your car to be able to charge again. So these are kind of the 5-year timeline crazy predictions, but trends in 2 different industries we've seen happen show that this kind of thing can be a reality. So anyways, the prediction is if we see new attacks on cars this year, we suspect they might involve the charging platforms too, as it's an interesting avenue or attack surface that we've seen in other devices like mobile phones for sure. What to do about this? Well, this is kind of a new one. And if you don't have a smart car, there's no real business practicality to this. So I don't have a lot of tips other than car manufacturers themselves doing secure design and trying to avoid these kind of problems. And you can certainly put anti-malware on some of the servers that might run charging software. But in the end, this is kind of just a warning to consider your Internet of Things profiles. We're talking about cars here, but there's lots of devices showing up in your business today that don't look like computers, but act just like computers. And they can be hijacked. And even if the direct device seems low value, for instance, if I hijack a Linux-based Wi-Fi refrigerator, you might ask, who cares? You know, at worst, I'll spoil your food. That's not the case. At the very least, that refrigerator could be on your internal network. So even if I could care less about your refrigerator, that refrigerator becomes the bastion host, which I have easier access to all your other computers. So as you think about things like car hacks from a business perspective, just consider your Internet of Things profile.
You know,
Moving right along.
you know, I just want to mention in that regard, I don't think people even put much thought towards how many things in their household might already be connected to the internet. I mean, you're looking at things like security systems, doorbells, you know, Nest, you know, thermostats,
your Hue light, yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, there's TVs, right? Smart TVs and remote controls, cable boxes, gaming systems, door locks, smart plugs, smoke alarms. Oh my gosh, I mean, it's endless. It's seemingly endless, you know. So, right, within that home environment, which is often like the Wild West, I mean, there's so many things you might already have in your environment you might not even realize that are already connected to the internet. And I know it's for a lot of times when people get these devices, they just kind of accept the defaults and they don't change things. So, experienced hacker, I mean, they can get into some of this stuff within minutes, you know, and if you're targeted anyways, you know, scary.
And you're right that the defaults, keeping the password defaults are one of the worst things you can do. At the very least, change the password. The other thing people don't realize is they think of hardware as just this static thing, but all those devices do have firmware updates. You can patch every single one of them. We talk about them like they're hardware, but they all run software. And while firmware updates aren't as regular as, say, a Windows software update, you should definitely go and upgrade those devices quite often because their updates bring security fixes just like Microsoft's patches do. The other thing is, you were speaking from the consumer point of view. I think a lot of people have forgotten. They're like, I don't have a smart TV in my office, but guess what? You might have bought a collaboration TV. You might have bought a business-focused version of that smart TV that sells itself as, look, you can draw on the screen and have these collaboration capabilities. Or you bought a fancy phone that has teleconferencing capabilities and other fancy office phone capabilities. And how does it do that? Well, it actually is a computer running on that little speakerphone in your. So the point is, there's a lot of business things too that have leaked into our businesses. And again, my water cooler, the reason I know this is we picked a particular water cooler, and we, of course, are a security company, so we have a lot of smart hackers that work for us. Somebody, literally the touchscreen on the water cooler, they kind of hacked it and took it over as a joke just to show it was possible. So the same thing you said about consumer devices, we sometimes think it doesn't have, oh, maybe it's only printers in our office or things like that. There's a lot of subtle devices in office places too that have that internet connection and are just computers that run software, which can be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So this next one, I can probably go pretty quickly, but this is more a general society prediction, but it's users are going to revolt over smart device privacy. And what we see here is obviously, as these Internet of Things and as these devices trickle into our house, more and more of them learn a lot about who we are and what we do. And there's a positive side to this. You know, all of us know that Amazon shopping starts to create Amazon giving us recommendations. And sometimes those recommendations are great because they've understood our interests and they give us recommendations for things we really would be interested in. The side effect of all that is all that data gathering these big tech organizations are doing can be used for bad just as much. You know, sometimes we don't want them to have all this information about us to target stuff. And it gets even worse when you have companies like phone companies that might sell some of that data to other organizations who then sell it to other third-party organizations. And you have situations where a phone company says your GPS details are private, but then they've legitimately sold it to one other organization who then sells it to bounty hunters who can actually ping where you are. So we've all kind of watched over the past few years as we figured out that social media sites, things like the webcams and the digital assistants that are always listening to us are gathering more and more information. Even I'm kind of a VR enthusiast, I'm an all-around nerd. And even my favorite VR headset requires a Facebook connection nowadays. So privacy is an increasing thing. And it's increasing for business too. I think we all know that many of our states have privacy laws today, but in Europe, they released the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation Act, I think is, hopefully I did the right acronym, but essentially it's an act that gives consumers tons of control over over allowing businesses whether or not they can hold certain private details about them. And those type of acts are filtering into the US. California already has 2 acts that are very similar to GDPR, and we suspect more and more are going to come. In any case, we as a society have been slowly letting go our privacy for some of the benefits we get from these devices. You know, we're kind of complicit in this, and that we're like, yeah, in order to get the benefits of Facebook for free, I'll let you use some of my data. But I think that's really starting to change. And as a society, we care much more. And you're going to see us start voting with our wallets as a whole. So I think you're going to see many of your customers, many of your employees, many of the people you serve are going to have a lot more privacy questions and are going to care about the people they do business with on whether or not they honor their privacy. And you're probably going to see more and more regulations that might, you know, some might be good for your business, but some might make it, you know, different for how you have to handle customer information. So it's just kind of a general industry-wide prediction that we see happening. I think you could even see how tech companies and social networks are going to be in front of Congress a lot more around this type of subject. So just something to be aware of if you run a business. Next prediction, luckily this one's very simple because I think we want to leave a little time for questions and we're getting short. Attackers swarm VPNs and RDPs as the remote workforce swells. And this, by the way, unlike the car prediction as a Hail Mary of a chocolate and peanut butter we think might come together but may not happen, this is almost a give me. You already know what VPNs are. I mentioned it before. RDP is remote desktop protocol. You know, you can remote control computers. A lot of you are probably using that a lot more now that we're working from home. And attackers have already been really targeting RDP. If you expose RDP to the internet openly, attackers are trying brute force attacks against it. They're trying password spraying against it. And often there's new vulnerabilities that just give them access. Same with VPNs. VPNs, while they serve a great security purpose, they're also a target because if you can gain access to one, you have almost unencumbered access to the entire network. Attackers have been attacking these already, but we think that these attacks are going to increase 2- or 3-fold now that people are remote working, for the simple fact that the bad guys know we're all working from home, so we're leveraging these remote access services much more greatly. Long story short, practical takeaway here is you really need to harden any remote access server you expose to help your remote employees work. I mentioned a remote desktop protocol. Even though it has its own authentication and encryption, I don't believe you should expose it directly to the internet. At the very least, you should have multi-factor authentication added to it, so a password alone isn't enough to log in. But more importantly, I think RDP should be exposed behind a VPN. Don't give a public address where people can just RDP to. You either need to have a VPN, so only very privileged users can gain access to the internal service, or if you have to expose the RDP directly, have some sort of access control list that limits what other people on the internet can connect to it. Put some sort of hardened security around RDP. Same with VPN. You might have heard me mention this before, but VPN should have MFA. Notice, by the way, MFA is a theme here. MFA is inexpensive and easy to use now. There's a lot of cloud-based solutions like WatchGuard's Offpoint. It's not a struggle to get MFA anymore. It's not overly costly. And a lot of these mobile-based solutions, you don't have to even type a second thing. You just can approve something on your phone. So it's removed a lot of the friction that users used to feel with MFA. So protect these type of services because they're going to be heavily targeted. Next one, also relatively simple, but this one gets a little specific, is attackers are going to pinpoint security gaps in legacy endpoints. You know, one thing, if you paid attention to security for a long time, is legacy software is a detriment to your security. If, you know, a lot of us sometimes don't patch or keep around old products longer than maybe we should. And any vulnerabilities in those products, you know, they're not zero day, they're very easy to leverage. There's tools bad guys can buy on the underground that has vulnerabilities for all of those. So you don't want to keep legacy software around too long. The other thing is, this prediction is very specifically focused on the recent ending of the extended support for Windows 7 and Server, was it 2008? And that happened recently. So as you know, Microsoft is no longer releasing patches for those two products. And yet they're very popular products that I suspect many organizations still have. You know, just speaking nerd to nerd, a lot of people remember 2000 and Windows 8. A lot of people didn't like it. It was some big changes. It's not until Windows 10 that a lot of people really are happy with where the Windows operating system went. So a lot of people are hanging on to these legacy servers and legacy desktops. And the problem is, if Microsoft is no longer patching, if a bad guy can find a zero-day vulnerability in this old software, there's a chance that Microsoft won't patch it, which means it's now a wide open door forever until the end of time. Now, I will say the good news is, even though Microsoft has officially ended support, which means they're not going to release any more patches, big vulnerabilities like WannaCry's SMB vulnerability sometimes change things. They have sometimes gone back and patched even Windows XP because something was just big enough that they felt it merited it. Nonetheless, the point here is be very careful with legacy software. You know, sometimes I know there's business reasons for keeping something old around. Maybe there's a custom system that only works on it, but you do want to move, you know, it's not just about giving Microsoft new money as they release new versions. It's about making sure you have a supported version that gets security patches. If you do have to keep something legacy around, you really want to harden it. You at the very least want to use intrusion prevention so that if there is a new vulnerability against that operating system that's not unpatched, you have a way to protect against it. Sorry, I'm speeding up, but I want to leave time for me and Stephen to give questions. I believe this is the last prediction, and it's this is a big Hail Mary because we're being very contrarian here, but every service without MFA will suffer a breach. And I think you kind of have heard my argument of this throughout the presentation. Whether it's spearfishing, whether it's attacking RDPs or VPNs, the easiest way for a bad guy to break into your network is to get a legitimate credential of one of your users. So with all the data breaches that happen, even to other sites, there's so much password reuse that bad guys use things like, it's called a password spraying techniques, where they use stolen passwords that your user may use on another site, hoping that your user might also use it in your workplace as well. And these type of password leaks have happened over and over. I don't think I have to talk too much about it, but really the only protection here is passwords are not going to go away for a long time. We might start to use biometrics and other methods too, but every single one of these tokens, even a biometric, can be fooled. I don't have time to go into detail, but look at some of the face ID hacks that work against Apple's really good facial recognition. They actually 3D scan your face, the Apple devices, and yet they can be hacked. There's fingerprints that have been hacked over and over. The point is, the only way to really make strong authentication is to use multi-factor authentication solutions. And as I mentioned, they've become very cheap and easy. We have a great one called AuthPoint. And so really realize that if you have anything exposed on the internet, any sort of login that doesn't have this, there's a chance that it's going to be breached. You know, I don't think every single service will be breached in reality, despite our prediction, because there's pure numbers just don't support it. There's a lot of stuff out there. But the potential is there that if you're not using MFA, you're going to be the low-hanging fruit and easy target. So definitely think about that. With that, we used a little more time than I expected, but I don't mind staying on for questions if the audience doesn't mind giving us a few extra minutes. But nonetheless, thank you guys very much for joining.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you, Corey and Steve, for that presentation. It seems like you have stirred up a few questions actually being sent over to me. So we're just going to jump into the Q&A just for a minute here, and then we'll wrap up. Looks like the first question is for you, Corey. What is the most common type of cyber attack, and what do you think is the #1 way to stop it?
Wow, that's a tough one because my mind goes to a lot of common cyber attacks. But when I talk about the top 5 threats, I always lead with spearfishing. I actually don't think it's the most common attack. Ransomware has increased quite a bit, but ransomware has become more targeted. But the reason I bring up spearfishing is when you look at successful breaches and successful malware, both of those things include phishing. You know, most malware, a huge percentage, somewhere around 85 to 90% of malware starts via normal phishing messages. And most successful breaches where an attacker has broken into a company and done a lot of bad stuff, whether it's install malware, steal data, or do lateral movement, most of those attacks start with spearfishing. If you check out a great resource called the Verizon Data Breach Report, which they release every year, by the way, WatchGuard is a partner in that report. We share some of our data. You'll find that spearfishing is kind of the attack that leads to all successful things, or to many, many successful things. So I really think spearfishing is one of the big things you should think about. And really what it comes down to is credential thefts. I think it's somewhere around 60 to 70% of attacks involve some sort of stolen, leak, or compromised credential. So what should you do about it? Twofold. One, MFA is something I think is kind of a green field in small to medium business. And in that, I think even though a lot of IT departments might have implemented MFA for 1 or 2 things, or for their privileged users or administrators, few small businesses have forced MFA for every single employee. So one of the best things you can do against spearfishing, credential attacks in general, is that multi-factor authentication. And the other thing is what I mentioned during the spearfishing thing. Have technical mechanisms that defang these phishing and spearfishing emails, remove the attachments and the links, but also focus on training, because security isn't just technology, it's also policy and it's also awareness. So make sure you train, which I think, by the way, PCA, you know, Steve and you guys might do yourselves or help with yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, great. And just one more quick question we have come in here. Is there a specific industry that gets hacked more than others? And if so, what is it?
That's an excellent question. I actually think a lot of bad guys find value in a lot, but the 2 things I'll say is criminal hackers definitely want to make money. So they do tend to focus on financial institutes or retail institutes, restaurants, anything that has a hard connection to money. It's very easy, if you can get access to a payment system, to start leeching information from that payment system directly, and or to, you know, gather a lot of PII, credit card information, that you can use to make money. I will say ransomware is a threat that, while it hasn't ubiquitous, you know, in 2016 it was affecting everyone, including consumers. Ransomware has gone down in volume a bit, but it has really focused on targeted businesses. And those are healthcare, manufacturing, education, and local state government. So the one example is with ransomware, any business that really needs strong uptime to their data, their digital information. Healthcare is obvious. If you have patient data, if the hospital can't access that patient data, a surgeon can't do surgery, right? He needs to know what the patient's allergic to before he can even give the person drugs. So access to patient data is critical for hospitals, and bad guys have found that by targeting hospitals with ransomware, it increases their chances of getting paid if they can really lock that hospital down. So for ransomware, I think healthcare, local and state government, education is targeted. But no matter what kind of business you are, you do have some value to these attackers. So while they are going after money specifically, you shouldn't assume you're not targeted just because you're not in one of those verticals.
Great. Thanks for that answer, Corey. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and talk about next steps here on this slide. A big thank you again to Corey and Steve. I'm sure everyone had some great takeaways from this discussion. And from everyone at PCA and WatchGuard, we want to give a special thank you to all of you that attended this session with us today. In terms of next steps, you can expect an email from PCA this week that includes the webinar recording. You'll also get some bonus resources to learn more about the importance of cybersecurity. And please know you can reach out to any of us if you have any additional questions or you want to set up a consultation. We're really just here to educate and help you in the best way that we can. And we'll also be doing more webinars in the near future, so keep an eye out for those. And finally, please expect an email with your $30 Grubhub reward. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you will have an option there to either claim the Grubhub or donate it to World Food Charity. So when you get that email, you'll see a button for each option. And I know we're excited to give you those options as we're always seeking to give back to the community. So please feel free to do whatever you'd like there. And if you have any further questions regarding that aspect, please feel free to reach out to me directly. But I think that just about covers everything. So thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your day.